What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we're going to continue working on the H22 preparation before we can go into Project CB9. Now, last episode, we took care of the timing components and reinstalled the valve cover. And in this episode, we got some reassembly aspects we need to address. So we're starting to see it at the light at the end of the tunnel. So let's go ahead and get started. And here's our old F22 engine that I've been pulling parts off of. So we need to go ahead and grab the compressor brackets and alternator bracket. And this heat shield looks like it's in better condition than the one I've got. The one I've got, it's got a little bit of surface rust on it. So I'll go ahead and pull these off and transfer them over to the H22. All right, went ahead and removed the alternator and AC compressor brackets from the old F22 engine. Now don't go ahead and discard this motor until the swap is all complete. I've already had to go back to this engine and grab a few miscellaneous nuts and bolts and obviously these two brackets. So let's go ahead and put these on the H22 and we'll put the AC compressor and alternator in place also. Okay, so I have decided I am going to mount the intake manifold to the engine before it goes into the car. I believe getting access to all the mounting bolts is going to be a safer bet. Plus, I'll be able to make all the electrical connections in a more efficient manner. And then I'm going to go ahead and install this thermal intake manifold gasket. This is made by Golden Eagle. Honda makes one as well. So this one had great reviews. Now, if you're going to plan on taking the intake manifold off anytime soon and whatnot, I just can't imagine trying to scrape off the paper intake manifold gasket, you know, if this thing is inside the engine bay, because that's basically facing the firewall. So this will do yourself a big favor. This is reusable, plus it's supposed to give you, I don't know, 4, 5, maybe 3 horsepower gain. So, you know, the fact that this thing is reusable and you don't have to scrape anything off, you know, pays its dividends itself. Okay, so let's go ahead and slip the intake manifold gasket on and then the intake manifold itself. Next step of the process, we need to go ahead and bolt on our distributor using these 3 12mm bolts right here. And then we need to go ahead and bolt on our exterior coil with these 3 10 millimeters right here. Okay, let's go ahead and get started on the engine wiring harness modifications. Now over here on the right-hand side, that's the H22 harness that came on the motor. And on the left-hand side is the F22 harness that came in Project CB9. So what we need to do is make modifications to this harness so it can go on to the H22 engine. And the reason that we do that is because of the fact that this is OBD1 plus these plugs that go into the body are a lot different than what's on the H22 with these plugs. So we'll be basically making some modifications to this F22 harness before we go ahead and plug it up to the H22 engine. In addition to that, there's a few connectors on this H22 harness we'll be cutting off. We'll be wiring that on the inside of the car. So I'll go ahead and cover that later on. But let's go ahead and focus on getting this F22 harness modified and then fitted onto the engine. Okay, here's our F22 engine that we got under cover, pulling parts off of. We'll then go ahead and show you what's going on. Here is the oil pressure sensor that's on the F22. As you notice, it's above the oil filter. And let me go ahead and show you what's going on with the H22. And as you can see here, the oil pressure sensor is right below the oil filter on this H22. So we're gonna have to extend out the connector on the F22 harness before it goes onto this engine. So let's go ahead and take care of that. Another thing to note on this H22, right below the intake manifold is a NOx sensor. CB9 does not have a NOx sensor, so we're gonna go ahead and show you how to wire that up on the inside later on. Okay, backside of the H22 engine, we've got the oil pressure sensor on the bottom of the oil filter, and this green sensor up here, that is your NOx sensor. The F22 does not have a NOx sensor, so I'll get into the wiring aspects on that later. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and cut off the harness connector on the H22 harness, which has a longer wire, because the wiring harness runs above this oil filter right here, and we'll go ahead and solder that onto the F22 harness. Let me go ahead and show you. So over here on the H22 harness, you see this longer wire right here? It's got a rubber boot to it. Yeah, there's a metal ring in there, and that's how it attaches to the oil sensor. And so we'll be cutting this off. So I've already cut off the factory harness that's on the F22, and the F22 uses a different oil pressure connector. And that's what it looks like. It basically just pushes right on. So on the H22 harness, we'll go ahead and cut this oil sensor off, and we will solder into position on the F22 harness. Okay, made the modifications on this F22 harness. As you can see, this wire's been extended. This is basically the oil pressure sensor. And this is what came off the H22. All right, now that I made the modification on the F22 harness, putting on the H22 oil pressure connector and making the wire a little bit longer due to the fact that it's going to be under the oil filter as opposed to on top of it. We can go ahead and test fit this harness into position and see what other complications we may have. So let's go ahead and get this fitted onto the H22. Okay, wiring harness is now set in a position. There is some technical difficulties, so let me go ahead and show you the two main aspects I'm working with right now. Now, the alternator cable is known to be short for the alternator, but however you can see, there is some flex right here, but this alternator cable usually has to plug into the side due to the fact that this plastic has like a little lip right here. It has a depression right in here, so it only wants to accept it from the side. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my Dremel and cut off just a little bit of a lip right here because you can't turn this little collar right here. I tried doing that. And so once you do that, take that bolt out. This ring terminal should sit straight flush right in the terminal. Now, if you got any concern of this ring terminal touching the body of this alternator, you can go ahead and wrap this end right here with some electrical tape just to be on the safe side, but I need to go ahead and get myself another rubber boot because the rubber boot that came on this was torn. So head in the yard tomorrow morning, so see if I can find a rubber boot for this. So I'll go ahead and take that Dremel and just cut a little bit of this lip off so it'll bolt on easy. The other alternative is just to make an extension, but I don't think that's necessary, so I think I've got enough slack for this. And then the OEM plastic cover went on pretty smoothly. Looks like a nice OEM finish right there. And this is where it hooks up to the driver's side strut tower. Got all the fuel injectors hooked up, bolted up the wiring for the fuel injector harness as well. And over down here with the oil pressure sensor, wire is just a little bit too long. So I'll go ahead and get a tie strap and secure this into place. I'd rather have this a little bit longer than shorter. Basically, I just took that ring terminal and tightened it in position. So now we've got the oil pressure sensor properly hooked up. Now there's a few plugs over here on the passenger side, and that's due to the fact that a lot of these plugs plug into the automatic transmission. So I haven't figured out what I'm gonna do to cap off these plugs. I'm definitely not gonna cut them off. So I don't know if there's like some shrink tube thing that I can just put on top of them and heat them up and it'll seal it up. So I'm gonna see what people do online, get an idea for that. And then the one thing that we have to worry about is hooking up this coil pack. So in the F22, the coil pack was pretty close to the distributor, but since we have the VTEC solenoid in the way, it moved the coil pack backwards. And here's the connector for the coil pack. And as you can see here, this coil pack is in this loom right here. And there's other small wires that are hooked up to this, so it's not allowing this cable to go backwards. So I gotta undo the tape, which I've already done, split the loom apart, which is just basically plastic, and then I'll be able to take this cable right here, route it under the thermostat, and then into the connector. I already measured with some string, so it will work. I'll just have to retape this up with the loom, and then put a new loom onto the small wires and tape that up. So I believe that will work out pretty well. There's also some straight connectors right here, and I think this is for automatic transmission. So I'm gonna go to yard tomorrow. I'm gonna take some detailed pictures of the harness connectors and see where they plug in, but I think this is for like solenoids and whatnot for an automatic transmission. And I know this is for the starter right here. And there's a green plug that's in here, and I'm not sure exactly where that plugs into. So I'm either gonna look at a wiring diagram or take some detailed pictures of the yard from a 90 to 93 Accord and see what's going on. So I'm either gonna check out a wiring diagram or take some detailed photos at the yard tomorrow just to determine where these connectors go. I wish I marked these things with, you know, a marker or whatnot, but when I was taking this thing apart, I thought I would go back easier. It's just maybe one or two connectors we're worried about right now, so that's not too bad. And there's one more connector over here by the oil filter, and I believe this is for the oxygen sensor. It goes from the header pipe underneath the engine right before it hits the catalytic converter. So this won't be able to be plugged in until obviously the engine is inside the car. But I'm gonna go ahead and make the modifications right now to extend this wire right here for the coil pack. So I'm gonna go ahead and take my Dremel and cut a little bit of this collar right off. That way we can plug the spring terminal back into the alternator and it'll sit flush. So let's go ahead and knock this out. All right, this is the EGR valve that's on the OBD2 H22 engine. As you can see, this round connector is a lot different than what's on the F22. So I believe this connector right here is what's intended for the EGR valve. I'll go ahead and show you the EGR valve now that it's removed from the F22. And here is the F22 EGR valve with the appropriate connector that will plug into our F22 harness. So we'll go ahead and remove the one that's on the H22 and go ahead and install this in position. And there's two 12mm bolts to remove. And here here's the EGR valves. This is the OBD2 H22. As you can see, this is the round connector. And this is the old F22 with this oval connector right there. Both of them have the same base. And as you can see here, the H22 one is a lot more dirty than the F22. But I'm gonna go ahead and spray some brake parts cleaner in there just to clean things out before I go ahead and bolt it back in position. Let it thoroughly dry, and then we can bolt it onto the H22 engine. And this is the first time I had to use a crow's foot in order to access the one bolt closest to the head. That was pretty tough with all the wrenches I tried and whatnot, but crow's foot is the only thing that I could do in order to get this EGR valve off the H22. Okay, I got the F22 EGR valve into place, and obviously got the wiring harness connected to the EGR valve, so that's now correct. Now what I'm trying to do here next is I've got the intake manifold bracket set back into place, and here's the main wiring harness for the engine. And what I'm trying to do is there's this metal tab right here, and there's a green clip-on that was from the H22 harness and actually clips into place. So that eliminates the harness from bouncing and any movement and whatnot. But right now, I'm about, I don't know, ½ inch, maybe full inch away, because I've got a lot of intersection of wires as it relates to this metal tab. So I believe I found a solution here. So over here on the side of the intake manifold of the H22, we've got this fancy bracket. I looked on the F22 intake manifold, doesn't have anything this intricate. So if I take this away, I'll be able to get this harness another, hopefully ½ inch, 1 inch going that way, which will then give me the clearance that I needed. So I think there's a 10mm right there. So I'm gonna take my wrench and pull this bracket off right here, and we should be good to go. Okay, next step of this process is we've got this green connector right here, and it needs to connect over into this connector on the thermostat housing. However, I don't have enough reach for that. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut back this wrapped up tape right here. And then we're gonna go ahead and extend the wire. So I'm gonna go ahead and clip this connector off right here. And then we're gonna go onto the H22 harness. Now on the H22 harness, we got two green connectors that look like one another. So you wanna go ahead and grab the connector that's obviously round in shape, and it's got the black wire on the top where the tab is at. And you see here, there's a little notch out. So if we come over here to the engine, obviously this connector is round, and then there's the notch out right there. And as you can see here on this F22 harness, this top wire is black, closest to the tab right here, and the bottom wire is blue. On this H22 harness, it looks like the bottom wire is green, so a little bit of a color code difference, but I believe this is the harness we need right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this as close as I can to the main harness. So I want as much slack as possible. So we'll go ahead and clip this off, and then we'll go ahead and resolder it onto the F22 harness that's on the H22 motor.
Like a song needs a song to sing it louder. You are the light of my life. Like the ones neath the trees, you give me shelter. Like the sun needs its stars, you make my world shine bright.
Back at the yard this morning, I got a 93 silver sedan and a 93 black sedan right next to one another, which is pretty convenient. So we need to go ahead and take some pictures and videos of the vacuum system and some wiring harness connections. And silver one 326,000 miles, excellent usage. Looks like the black sedan has the 10th anniversary 6-spoke wheels. Those are pretty nice for 15-inch. 316,000 miles. Again, excellent usage on this one. And there's a few miscellaneous parts that I need, like this alternator boot right here. And then I need to go ahead and look at all the wiring harness connections over here on the transmission side to see how it compares to what the H22 connections are. So I'm gonna go ahead and start pulling a little bit of parts off so I can get a closer look at what's going on underneath this distributor and airbox assembly. So we'll see what we can find here. Okay, went ahead and did some dissection on this Junkyard 92 Accord here. Remove the airbox so I can see what the wiring harness connects to. And as you can see here on the transmission parts, I've got a gray connector right here, another gray connector right there, and a green connector right there. So that's 3 connectors on the front side of the transmission. And this is the water outlet connector. And then moving on by the distributor, looks like there is a green connector right down there, right by the connection points of the distributor and coil pack. And also you've got a connector there on the EGR valve. I'm just trying to get a thorough understanding of all the vacuum hose routing here, because that's a little confusing on my behalf. So the more pictures and videos that you have, easier it is to reinstall everything and eliminate any errors. Okay, let me go ahead and show you guys a recap of what was covered on this episode. So we've got the F22 AC compressor bolted in place. We've got the F22 alternator bolted up also. And then we went ahead and made the modification on the alternator collar for the plastic mounting tab right there. So now that the alternator cable flows pretty well and attaches into place. And we've also got the H22 plastic harness retainer on top of the motor, just how it is for OEM. And we're able to set in place the main engine wiring harness, made all the connections that we could. And we took this oil pressure switch connector from the H22 and went ahead and soldered it in position on the F22 harness. And then we're able to secure the harness in position using some of the H22 clips, such as this one right here, another one right here, and another one right there. Went ahead and installed a 92 to 96 Honda Prelude OBD1 VTEC distributor. I took the wiring harness that was branching off from the front side, relocated that to the back side, was able to make some connections onto the wiring harness itself. Had to make an extension on the wiring harness connector on the back side of the thermostat housing, replace the EGR valve from the F22 onto the H22 intake manifold, installed the H22 intake manifold with a thermal insulating gasket. We then identified these 3 plugs go into the automatic transmission, so these will be left unplugged. If you guys have any suggestions of how to cap these off, please let me know. Opened up the wire loom on the harness in order to give some extra slack for this external coil connector, since the external coil on the F22 is much closer on the distributor. We've got the VTEC solenoid in the way, so we had to relocate some things. So that's basically a recap of what transpired in this episode. So if you guys got any questions, please feel free to let me know. I'll be happy to help you out. All right, guys, that's all the time we've got for today's episode. We were able to get a lot accomplished, including the AC compressor, alternator, intake manifold, distributor, external coil pack, and most importantly, the engine wiring harness. Now we've got a few more steps to go on this H22 before we can go and drop it back in Project CB9. And I hope you guys can join. If you guys like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day.